Jack here, JBF Music and Guitar Lessons, back with some legato tips for you that will hopefully help out as much as they have for me. In this quick guitar tricks, we're looking at Tom Quayle's amazing legato technique. Now, I'm not gonna lie, his legato is light years ahead of mine, but I found some of his tips to be really very helpful. At its core, this is a lot like the warm-up tip I picked up from Rick Graham and Kiko Del Rio, which you can check out with a little eye up there. Being largely self-taught, I've got a ton of bad habits, which I'm slowly finally working my way through. Legato, currently in the crosshairs. Okay, essentially the idea is to focus on technique over sheer force. The best analogy I can think of is Bruce Lee's 1-inch punch. He proposed that from just 1 inch he could generate a more powerful and effective strike than a novice throwing a haymaker. It's a bit like a great judo or other martial arts master. They could breeze right through you and throw you to the floor before you've even felt it. And if this borderline ridiculous way of explaining of all things a hammer-on appeals to you, then make sure to subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss out on new, oddly worded content. So I'm breaking this down into 6 tips. The timestamps and chapters are as always below. First tip, use the tip. The tip of your finger. It yields the best force to impact ratio. A pinhead is way easier to push through a sheet of paper than the flat side while applying the same amount of force. The same power exerted on a smaller surface area will yield the greatest impact. To outline these examples, I'm just going to use a chromatic 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th frets, all on the G string. Just do whatever is comfortable to you. You might want to try this out for yourself, first using the pads of your fingers for hammering, followed by the tips. Tip 2, near the fret wire. Try to get as close to the fret wire as you can. The string is closer to the fret here and needs pushed down the smallest amount. We're talking a tiny distance, but all these little things do add up. You can experience this for yourself if you start with your finger off the fretboard and picking the string. Move it down till you're holding it and no more. Just so the note is clear. Keep that same amount of force in your finger and keep playing and move towards the neck. You'll hear that the note is choked out. If you move it back, still applying the same amount of force to the string, the note returns. Tip 3. Let your hand move. Try not to anchor any fingers down, this will cause tension and fatigue, so let them move if needed. For this trill here, you might notice I'm moving my arm a tad. Now I could anchor this first finger in position and just hammer on, but because of tip 1 we're trying to get as close to the fret wire as possible, and to do that I just need to move my left arm just a tiny bit. Maybe just a few millimeters, just so I can get my little finger there comfortably. Rather than locking it into one stiff position. So again, this is totally a new concept for me, but it just feels way less tense than before. You might want to also experiment with lifting your fingers up. So rather than anchoring this down and holding them all down, you can try doing this. I'm not too sure, for me, the jury's about out if that's better to do or not. Overall it feels less tense, so it'd be really interesting to know what your guys' experiences are with this in the comments. And if you are getting something from this content, then do let me know with a like and a comment. These things really do help out the video's visibility and give the channel a huge boost. Tip 4. Now I'm guessing most of you already know how to hammer on, but want to tidy it up, a bit like myself. If so, relax as much as you can, all the way through your hand, up through your arm, up through your shoulder. If you're new to hammering, you'll be building this kind of new muscle strength and memory, so it might be a little bit tricky, but just bear in mind you don't want a cramped feeling in your hand when you're hammering. However, once we've built that strength, we don't need to put in as much effort to get to the desired result. This is similar to my concept of the pick hacking video. I'll pop a link with a little eye up in the corner. Tip 5, minimal movement. See how close you can hammer to the fretboard and still get a sound. You'll probably be surprised. Like me, I would have thought I need to come from quite far away, but you really don't. Especially if you're applying the previous tips. You can see my little finger here, he's still going a bit rogue, sticking out a country mile like I'm chugging down hard on some afternoon tea served in the world's finest china. But other than him, the other guys seem to be falling in line, which is a good sign. Tip 6. Focus on the feeling, man. So this is an almost obnoxiously hippie thing to say, but this was Tom Quayle's main point that really helped me. By combining all the previous tips, you'll feel this looseness in your hand. If you watch the guy do legato, you'll likely vicariously pick up on the same vibe. The word that works best for me is breezy. Any better ones or alternative suggestions, fire them down in the comments. If I start digging in too much, I'll focus on that word and the imagery it connotes. Don't worry too much about getting the strongest sound, focus on this tension-free feeling. You might not nail it the first time or get consistency, but after 5 to 10 minutes or so, that eureka moment of sudden clarity should kick in. Now, my way of applying this stuff is to use it on new things that I'm learning. A lot of my older licks will be a total pain to relearn, so my hope is, and this is a bit of an experiment, that if I learn the new stuff using this, it will become second nature without too much grief, headache, or technique overhaul, which, let's face it, we all want to avoid. Ideally, over the next few months, it will start to manifest in the older licks and just sort of naturally become part of my playing. Here's hoping. Okay, time for a recap. Tip 1, use the tip of your finger as much as possible. Tip 2, play near the fret wire as much as you can. Tip 3, let your hand move if it needs to. Tip 4, keep it breezy, or indeed any word of your choosing. Tip 5 is minimal movement. Now, admittedly, like all of these new ideas, this is a bit of a work in progress for myself, particularly with this rebel without a cause over here. And tip 6 is don't overthink it and train your hand to try and stay in this feeling. Okay, we can pretty much apply these tips to pull-offs as well. The only thing I'll add is to make sure you flick through the string. Whether you go down or up, it's up to you. Almost as if you were picking it, but with your finger. And do that rather than simply lifting off, because it just produces a much more consistent, stronger sound. Or, wild and crazy option, you could do an Alan Holdsworth and just hammer everything on. You can check out some of his licks with the left hand legato with a little eye up in the corner. But here's that intro lick. Again, this isn't about chops, it's about dialing this right technique into your hand. To be honest, a medium tempo is easiest for me to do this. So the slower is, I tend to use more force. If it's too fast, I tend to stop. But you might notice as I slowed down there, it sounded more awkward for me to play, and it was, because you're having to contend with the sustain of the guitar and kind of ringing out notes a bit more. So it's a bit of a case of kind of like you're finding your Goldilocks speed, if you want to put it that way. For me, it's a kind of mid-tempo one. So this is all triplets as well. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you pick it, you can hear it a bit better. So watch out for that. It can be a bit tricky doing triplets on groups of 4 on one string and make it still feel like triplets. But I mean, having said that, the main point here is to work on technique. So if you feel it as 16th notes, as long as you're keeping the tips in mind, it still very much serves its purpose. Okay, bonus tip for watching this far, shout out to the Lick Squad League, you guys rock. Try to keep a true legato sound as smooth and as uniform as possible. Hybrid picking or just using your fingers can really help kind of level out that pick attack. So by this what I mean is a nice legato sound would be all really uniform, rather than where you can hear that first note's accented. So you want to pick quite softly or use your fingers. or a combination of the two, just to try and keep everything kind of uniform. And to just hit home at the point, this is to keep it as breezy as possible. So for me, the 5th fret on the D string to the 3rd fret on the G, and then back to the 5th on the D and 2nd to the G, in particular really benefit from hybrid picking, although as I ran through it there when I was switching strings most of the time after I got up to the B, I was hybrid picking them. So as another side note, Tom Quayle tunes his B and his E strings up a semitone to C and F respectively, so the strings are all tuned in fourths. But what this means is scale shapes can be played more symmetrically, although it's much more difficult for chording, you have to relearn things and shift them. I'm just in standard tuning to keep things a bit more straightforward. Alright, you can also apply this to your regular legato workouts and exercises. Why not try some 3-note per string pentatonics if you're feeling particularly brave, like in the card up there. If you're feeling the benefit from this, check out that warm-up tip. This has been Quick Guitar Tricks, that's the playlist there. But yeah, hit subscribe to keep up to date with the channel, leave me a comment, check out the tabs on my Patreon, and enable all notifications by ringing that little bell on the side if you feel so inclined. Cheers guys.